this entire presentation. Oop,
Oh,
I was not supposed to be giving this entire presentation. My buddy Ian was supposed to be giving it alongside me, but he got kind of sidetracked by some stuff in California that he had to deal with, so he is not here. So I'm giving the entire thing. So, a cave that I've been interested in for a while was Blue Hole at the base of Ellison's. And I know that a lot of different people had tried to dive it to get back into the dry cave that had been reached in the 80s, and no one had had success. So
no.
I decided to kind of go at it and see if we could get it done. The history of the cave starts in 1968. Three or four different groups of divers tried to dive it through the 60s and 70s, and almost none of them had much luck. Most of them didn't make it more than 40 feet. There's a number of confusing entrance passages that look like they would go, and they end up just turning into really, really nasty restrictions that are almost humanly impossible. Um, and there's only one that really goes. And that was originally found by a Welsh cave diver, John Parker, in 1976. When you go in, everyone tries to go down to the right, and you have to go up to this little square body tube in the top left corner, and that's the way on. And he was able to make it through in 1976, and he made it about 200 feet into the cave. We think he made it to what we've called the line grader or line eater restriction, and that's as far as he was able to make it. In 1984, Woody Jasper, Lamar Hires, and Wes Skiles started working on the project. They did about 5 different dive trips during that period, and they were able to move a very large boulder and get through a very, very nasty restriction and eventually create a somewhat decent map of the underwater section and the dry cave past this restriction. On their last dive, they attempted to do a dye trace from what they named Goliath's Armory, which is kind of the terminal room with water coming out of the floor. It's just a massive breakdown room. And they went in and did a dye trace from the glubs, terminal room and the glubs, and the dye came out about 15 minutes later. And basically, they did this entire trip, and then they ran into major issues trying to exit the cave. They had several visiting cave divers on that trip. They had about 6 divers in the system, and the system's just too small to have those many divers. The line ended up breaking through the restriction, trapping Woody, Lamar, and Jasper on the far side of the restriction in dry passage. They spent probably an hour or two trying to reconnect the line, very low on gas, and were eventually able to get through. And basically, no one ever, they never decided to go back after that. So I'm just kind of going through this quickly. Several divers tried to dive this thing in the early 2000s. I know Forrest and Mark Wenner tried to dive it. I think a few other people might have tried to dive it. I'm not totally sure. And from everyone I had talked to, basically everyone said the cave only went 20, 30 feet. No one was clearly able to find the way on. I first dove it in 2022 in November, and I completed 3 solo dives there with my girlfriend of the time. She kind of just waited on the surface for me. My first dive was really just to try to locate the entrance. And luckily, one of my friends had given me basically some beta on how to get into the main entrance. And I was able to find it after about 6 minutes. It's a very, very small body tube. It's quite spooky. And the second I went in there, the visibility basically went to 0, so I exited. I waited about 30 minutes to the second dive, was able to get to the line grader restriction, and I decided that I didn't want to go through that solo. And the third one, I just surveyed from the line eater restriction all the way out. It's a small cave, lots of, well, one major restriction, a lot of minor restrictions, and there's about 5 lines in the cave, which are all very dangerous, having those many lines in a cave of that size. A second trip, I was joined by Ian Flom. I did the first dive and secured the line when looked at the line grader restriction. Ian did the second dive. He was luckily able to make it through the restriction. He was also kind of spooked out from it and wanted to make sure he could get back through the thing. So as soon as he got through it, he turned around and exited. I did a third dive and was also able to make it through the line grader restriction, but had like a similar mentality where I was like, I want to make sure I can get back through this thing. So I exited, and on my exit, I actually busted one of the 2 lines going through this restriction, and they were all quite old. Basically, our dive assessment was that we needed to remove a bunch of the old lines and put in a thick 5mm line through the restriction. These are some pictures of the cave. If you look on the left, this is the line that I removed from the cave after breaking a line in the restriction. In the center, you can see a good picture of the spring when it's clear, the left vent and the right vent. And if you look to the right, you can see the entrance to the line grader restriction. It's basically a small bedding plane, and then halfway through it, it turns into a canyon. So you have to rotate your body halfway through this thing and kind of shimmy your way through as your gear's getting caught up on all kinds of sharp little nodules and such. And I think that actual process of turning in this restriction has caused the line to break, from what we know, 3 times in the cave's history. Our third trip, our goal was to reach dry passage and begin surveying. Me and Ian decided to dive through as a team. He tied in the primary, came back out, confirmed that it was tied in. I went in first and was able to lay line from the restriction to the surface, which was basically 20 feet above the restriction. We came up into Larch Canyon Passage, and we basically scouted the first 1,500 feet to the terminal room since we knew it had already been surveyed. One of the cool things we found is in this picture in the right. We found a rock cairn that was built by Woody Jasper in 1985. On this trip, we also surveyed 886 feet from the far side of the sump into the cave. Cool. These are some pictures from the cave. We decided to name the main passage Ellison's Avenue. That's on the left here. In the middle, these are some of the only speleothems in the actual cave. And then these are Woody Jasper's footprints that we saw in the cave that would have been made in 1985. So I thought that was pretty cool. Just the history behind the cave.
Great job.
Okay, of course, with the history of this cave and just unfortunate, sketchy things happen that continued to happen to us as well. With how many lines there were in the cave, Ian had accidentally connected his primary reel from the surface into one of the other main lines, which all lay pretty close to one another. So he exited first. It was almost an entirely zero visibility exit. And at some point, I reached the end of a line that was broken. And I saw a hand holding that broken line, which was Ian sitting there waiting for me to run a line out of the cave. That line should have gone to the surface. Luckily, the exit was only about 50 feet away, and I was able to tie in and find the surface relatively easily in zero visibility. This kind of gave us more incentive to clean up the line even more. And Ian decided that he would go back before our next dive earlier in the day while I was at work and work on cleaning up the cave. Fourth dive, I was at work. Ian and Mark Wenner joined us. They both didn't have work that day, so they went in early. They went basically in midday. And I went in and solo dove later in the evening and met them on the far side of the restriction and continued surveying. When I reached them, they had basically surveyed all the way to Goliath's armory, and we found some side passages, some canyon passages in the back of the cave that had been unsurveyed to begin surveying. So I'm not sure the total extent that we actually surveyed that day. About 550 feet is what it looks like. Our plan for exit was that I would go first, Mark would go second, and Ian would go third. Okay, more pictures. So these are some of the canyon leads that we had in the back of the cave that we still need to push. There's Mark and I in some of those leads. This is another shot of Ellison's Avenue. And then we ran into another problem on exit. So I went through first. I was able to make through the restriction fine. Ian and Mark both basically had to exit from the surface in complete zero visibility. And we were still unaware of all of the lines that had been left in the cave from the 80s. And right before the restriction, there was an unknown line that went straight down into a heads down restriction that we were somewhat unaware of. Mark, unfortunately, took a wrong turn at that point, went down, and ended up in what he deemed to be an unpassable restriction. Realized he was in the wrong place, he turned around and was able to get through successfully. Ian did almost an identical thing where he went down that heads down restriction. He ended up coming back up to the surface, surfacing in the sump, reassessing, and then he came back through, was able to find the restriction, got through. After that, Mark made it out fine. Ian had a few other issues. He was trying to carry a dry bag that had very poor buoyancy characteristics, and he ran into issues with that. He lost it in the ceiling for a second, was able to find it. He lost a fin somehow, but luckily he was able to get all those things back on, get out of the cave fine. Ooh. So this is a video of Mark Wenner coming through the line eater restriction after going down the wrong line. I was waiting for him on the other side. And he actually decided to go through a very thin, small bedding plane that I don't think I could have gotten through. So that had to be a good time, I'm sure. Fifth dive, it was just me and Ian. We decided to try to remove that other dangerous line, install a 5mm guideline through the main restriction, and survey some of the side passages, specifically Bear Scratch Passage. The dive was a relative success for Ian. I was also going to survey from the surface in through the sump to the dry cave because we felt that it needed to be resurveyed, and I decided to take on that task. Halfway through that dive, while I was in the restriction, my mouthpiece that was in my mouth actually popped off of my regulator. And luckily my hands were in the right place in the restriction, and I was able to basically switch my regulators in the restriction. And I surveyed to the restriction, then Ian finished on the way out. We were able to survey a lot in Bear Scratch Passage. This is a video of me surfacing after losing my regulator. And if you look, you can see me holding my mouthpiece when I surface. So we surveyed a few 100 feet in Bear Scratch during this trip and then exited. And the exit was fine. This is a video of Bear Scratch. It's a fun little crawl. Has a lot of air moving through it. These are basically lessons learned from this dive and from all of our dives. I think before we went into this cave, we should have really assessed the line situation a little bit harder and cleaned it up. I think that would have prevented most of the problems we had in that cave. Whoop. And this is a picture of the map that Ian ended up making. See if I can zoom it on. Nope. Let's mess up. So I think we mapped about 2,200 feet of passage. If you look over here, it's the entrance, the sump, which is about 300 feet, 15 feet long, Ellison's Avenue, and then Goliath's Armory back here. One of the coolest things about this is that Goliath's Armory, if you trust the Ellison survey, is only about 70 feet away from the terminal room in the Glubs and Ellison's. It's a really scary breakdown, and I doubt there will be any connection made, just because it's such an unstable area and such a hard place to get to. But if someone really wanted to, I'm sure they could connect them. But it would take just a lot of work. Here's some close-ups on the map. You can see the sump here, the major restriction, parts of Ellison's Avenue, an unsurveyed passage that we still need to go back and survey, some domes. This is the extension of Ellison's. This is a side passage where we were able to find original footprints from Woody Jasper, Bear Scratch Alley. This is a lead off to the side that we still need to push, and this is Goliath's Armory. These are just thanks to people who helped me with the project. Cool. And I'd be happy to take any questions that anyone has about this.
The chilliness of the spring, was that any obstacle to,
So it's a relatively short sump.
Okay.
It's only about 300 feet long. It is 55 degrees, but you're not in there for very long. I believe that the groups that did it in 85 actually did it with no thermal protection, which is completely insane to me, to be honest.
It's cold.
Yeah, it's cold.
Hey, Joseph, I have a question.
Yep.
I saw how the line broke. Is that what you said?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Sorry, it's loud here. And you said someone's mask was kicked off. How did that play out?
So in 85, basically there was a diver who got very entangled in the restriction.
Oh, okay. So this was from the first dive. Okay. thank you
Yes,
for
that didn't
clarifying.
happen to us. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions?
Where do you think
Within
that passage on the right goes? That passage near the beginning of the cave that you haven't surveyed yet?
Yeah. What about it?
Is it like an infeeder or is it like an
Yeah,
over-
it's a small infeeder. It's got flowing water in it, and honestly, if the conditions are clear enough, we might. I don't think they will be, but we might go during the Tagfall cave-in. I don't know. We'll see.
That's cool.
But it needs to be surveyed. It's small, but it needs to be surveyed.
Joseph, this is Rocco.
Mhm.
Phenomenal diving, phenomenal survey. Congrats. It's the end of the cave though is about 1,500 feet past the gloves and down Mark's pit.
Mhm.
So you got the lower space of the gloves, and then you got a long passages, and then a pit before our final room that we got to.
I think
Which-
is it the terminal room? I haven't been in there. I haven't been to the back of Ellison's at all.
Yeah, I don't think we gave it a special name besides terminal room, but it sounds like what you're talking about as a similar, just kind of a crumbly, crappy breakdown room.
Yeah, every time we tried to like climb it or approach it, very large boulders were basically coming down at us. So after attempting to look at it or try to go up it once or twice, we just gave up. We were like, we're not chancing having to be rescued from this location. It's just not worth it at all.
Yeah, well, that's a phenomenal show.
Yep.
I got a question for you.
Yes.
Now I know, and maybe Andy can clear this up a little bit. Now, when you're doing your map and being able to plot your direction and all, have you been able to overlay that into the Ellis's overall map to see how close you may be to known passage
Yeah.
in the cave?
If you look at it's been plotted. Yeah. It's about 70 feet.
Oh, so it's about 70 feet close to.
It's 70 feet away from, I believe, the terminal room in Ellison's. If you look at the newest map of Ellison's, what we've done, I believe, has been plotted accurately. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you, Joseph. That was a wonderful presentation.
Cool.
Woo.
Woo!